Now, there are certain bacteria that are actually considered pathogenic in causing cancers. All right, so one I'd like to mention is Helicobacter pylori. It's a common bacteria that you will see in the stomach, and you don't want that bacteria because that one has been linked to cancer and can cause inflammation that damages your DNA and promotes cancer growth. The interesting thing about Helicobacter pylori is that it can happen in any age. And what happens with that bacteria is if one person in the household has it, another one can get it, right? So when that's happening and you don't treat for that, can you imagine somebody has this Helicobacter pylori organism for years and years and it doesn't get treated, and then they develop a lymphoma decades later, right? So this is something that we can address. Then we have viruses like HPV and hepatitis, HPV with cervical cancer, hepatitis with hepatocellular cancer. And what does it do? It affects our cells at the DNA level. All right, so those are genetic mutations, but they are happening as a result of these pathogenic organisms. Parasites can cause problems. And then there's some bacteria that actually produce toxins that cause the problem and disrupt the way your cells function. All right, so I know this is a very colorful graphic, but there is, like I said, your immune system, a lot of it lives in your gut, right? So there's a lot going on when it comes to your microbiota and the interplay there. So our gut lining, I like to think of the enterocytes really as our army, right? And you can imagine your army of enterocytes lined up defending against pathogens, defending the forces. When that gut lining becomes damaged, whether it's from a poor diet, alcohol, whatever it is. So imagine it's July 4th and all our defenses go out and they party and then they have to show up for work the next day. They're not so standing shoulder to shoulder, right? They're a little bit sideways, leaning this way, and they allow these pathogens to come into our body. And what do those pathogens do? They travel into our bloodstream and cause our body to release inflammatory chemicals and metabolites. And they can go anywhere once they're in the bloodstream. They can go to our brain, they can go to our thyroid and cause autoimmune thyroid disease. So many things going on here. Now, there are good bacteria and there are bad bacteria. So there are specific bacteria like Helicobacter, I already mentioned, increases your risk of gastric cancer. Salmonella increases your risk of gallbladder cancer. A specific strain of E. coli, CP1, increases your risk of prostate cancer. Bacteroides vulgaris increases your risk of colorectal cancer. Are we testing for these in our patients? No. We do not test for any of these unless you are working with an integrative or functional doctor. Okay? There's some bacteria that are actually protective. Lactobacillus can decrease colorectal cancer, and that's one that we often do find in probiotics. Fusobacteria. Pancreatic is a cancer that does not have a very good outcome, right? So could you imagine knowing that I could integrate or make sure I have this type of gut microbiome to decrease the risk of getting pancreatic cancer? So there's a number of bacteria that are linked to cancer development. So the underlying mechanism is twofold. One, certain bacteria decrease your risk of tumor, and two, certain bacteria increase. And there's many chemical pathways that are going on, upregulation, downregulation, proliferation in the body to make this happen. To keep it simple, microbial mechanisms. So number one, antibiotics. Number two, diet. Number three, your inflammasome, right? So the innate immune system that you have. And then aging. All of that is contributing to reduced bacterial diversity, meaning that you don't have a diverse microbiome. It's contributing to the loss of those beneficial, good gut bacteria that we want. And it's causing the accumulation of pathogenic or disease-causing bacteria. And all while that is happening, your gut lining has a nice mucosal barrier, and that nice mucosal barrier is being destroyed. When that's being destroyed, that nice bacteria gets penetrated by pathogenic ones, causing inflammation in the body. Or you can pick up a pathogenic infection. Where do we pick up most of our infections? Every time we walk in a hospital. Every time we walk in a hospital. So make sure you are washing your hands and being very careful every time you enter a healthcare facility. At the end of the day, that chronic inflammation pathway, it is causing DNA damage and genetic instability. So remember when I said that 95% of cancers are not genetics? This is different. This is what happens in the case of inflammation, all right? So it's not something you were born with. This is being caused by all the different things we do in our lifestyle. It is causing the risk of tumor onset. It can actually influence tumor progression, whether a tumor will become metastatic, okay? And how invasive the tumor will be. So oncogenic potential of bacterial toxins. I've already talked to you about Helicobacter pylori. There's a number of pathogenic mechanisms that are happening behind there by causing and enhancing cell proliferation, upregulating certain proteins. But E. coli also has that. And it's a specific toxin in there, the cytotoxic necrotizing factor 1, that can cause inflammation, can cause cell adhesion, cause a change in motility. It can cause also E. coli can cause the migration and invasion of prostate cancer cells. So usually when we think of E. coli, we're thinking of like food that we might have eaten that was infected by E. coli, but there's the chemical processes behind that that's happening. And then enterotoxigenic Bacteroides fragilis, that's another one. And what does that do? That affects those soldiers, right? Because it's increasing mucosal permeability. When you increase that permeability, pathogenic toxins, metabolites, organisms can enter in the body.